Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Sometimes it's about the principle rather than the actual amount spent. So I was on an off-site short-term, not really short, project. Coming from one of the cheapest to live countries in Europe and staying for months in Singapore, project location, I'd found some places that I could be eating for pretty cheap and the food was good and within my taste palette. We were getting, let's say, a random number, $60 per day for food expenses, but I was spending somewhere around $25 to $30 on average, with the highest ever getting to just under $50. Short project, going long, drawn over 10 months by the point of this story, and our customer's client is raising a ton of issues. 70% of them not really an issue. Discussed this a few times with some guys in my company, and a manager told me to take the client out for dinner and some drinks. He would confirm the extra expense. Just be careful to not go too much overboard on the expense. Specifically asked what that means, and he told me try not to go over $200 to $250. We go out, and neither me nor the client really drink much, so we end up having some food and a drink each. The guys at the restaurant know me well by that point and almost always do some rounding on the bill or bring something extra to the table on the house, and with them bringing plenty of finger food, I end up with a bill of $60.68. Number adjusted to the random number above. But yes, about 70 cents above the daily limit. Way below the 200 plus allowance for that. End of the month, I send the report in and put a special note for that day/night. Expense report goes through my company with no problems, but the customer, our company's customer, flags that receipt up as not acceptable and not to be covered. They put me in direct communication with customer and I explain, nope, not accepted, not covered. Talk again with my company and tell them the situation and that manager X advised me to do so, as well as mentioned he would confirm, but unfortunately the guy is out sick, COVID plus flu, and not to return for at least 2 weeks. The customer must have this settled by the 15th of the month, and he wants to hear specifically from the manager that I was advised to act in such a way and approved by that manager for him to cover it. This is getting crazy and out of hand, so my boss, owner of our company, just covers it from his side, the full $60.68, not just the 68 cents. Customer says no receipt that goes over the $60 limit will be approved. Unfortunately for me, the customer is local to Singapore, and he randomly drops in at the job site, and I get to see him the day after the resolution above, and all comments were written in emails. Face-to-face, I tell him, you do realize I spend on average less than $27 a day from the allowed $60 a day. This was laughable to be denied. He probably was offended, and he yells at me again, the no receipts over $60 will be covered. Well, QMC. At all three places that I eat every day for the past 10 months, they agree to print $60 receipts every time I eat at their place. They even agree to split in half the remaining value between me and a tip to the server. I'd requested for the entire amounts to go to the servers as tips, as I just cared for the petty revenge, but apparently all of them felt a 100% tip every day is uncomfortable for them. Next month, expense report is sent out, and the customer calls me directly seething and asks why every single daily receipt is at $60 from a specific date onwards. I just reply with no receipts over $60 will be covered, so I have to fit my meals within the allowance. He called to complain to my company, but the relevant person told him that they didn't understand and to please explain what agreement was broken. He never came back as far as I know. I continued charging the max for the remaining 2 months there, netting me a cool $700 and even better service, food, and chef experiments that were otherwise only internal to the staffs of the restaurants. To be honest, I had to pay and having to deal with the idiot customer even more after that, but he was a handful before it as well. I can say that the project took at least a year off my life with all the stress and nerves. Edit. Slight clarifications. Customer and client are two different entities in this story. Client A decides to get a product from customer B. B hires my company, C, to engineeringly manage the project that is performed by a different company, D. D doesn't play a role, so it's omitted from the story. They're the entity being so late. Manager that instructed me to take the client out was sick and out of reach. The customer wanted to only hear from the manager and nobody else. Maybe wanted to yell at him? I don't know. Charging dining other people, very rarely, expenses to customer B is how the company C has been operating with this specific customer B for many, many years, way before I started there. Example, when a government inspector has to be brought in at the end of the project, they're always dined on the expense of the customer. Expense report was submitted to Company C and approved to be sent to customer. Lastly, I just offered full money to the waiters for everything over meal cost. They accepted it first night, but from next day they said split 50-50 the tip because it was too much. Second restaurant said 50-50 directly. I ate there because that's what my stomach could handle for everyday meals while not being accustomed to local cuisine. Sometimes I used other places with more local food, but couldn't handle it daily. And our second story. So I hear you gave yourself a raise. This is actually my mother's story from when she was working back in the 70s. At the time, part of her job involved managing the company payroll. She had this boss, Fred, who would engage in unethical practices on a regular basis. One of his favorite tricks was to delay entering raises into payroll as long as possible. In other words, an employee would ask their manager for a raise, the two of them would agree upon an amount, and the person's manager would report the amount to my mother so that she could update the payroll. But instead of having my mother update that person's weekly pay then and there, Fred would have my mother write the name and amount on a little piece of paper, then put it in his drawer so he could approve the raise. In practice, this meant that he would intentionally sit on the raise until the person noticed their pay hadn't increased, at which point Fred would magically find the time to approve it. On several occasions, Fred privately blamed my mother for forgetting to pass on the person's information. After some time, my mother wanted a raise. She gave Fred an amount, he countered, and they compromised in the middle. She then entered it into the payroll. A few months later, she was called into Fred's office to find him standing there with a crap-beating grin on his face. The company accountant was also present. Fred, looking supremely self-satisfied, "So, I hear you gave yourself a raise." M. "No, you gave me a raise." Fred. "But you never gave me the slip of paper. We have a system." M. "But you told me we only did that so you could approve raises authorized by other managers. I'd spoken directly with you, so I assumed that meant the raise was approved." At this point, the accountant literally turned and walked out of the room. My mother was brusquely dismissed. A few minutes later, Fred left for the rest of the day, muttering something about a headache on the way out. And our next story. Friendship ended with Kroger. Now Publix is my best friend. I woke up to snow this morning, which was pretty rad on my day off. Since I just moved up from Florida, it was my second time ever seeing snow, and my only time in years. I was all about it. My sister, a native, warned me about potential power outages, so I headed down to my local Kroger to grab some food I didn't need to cook. I was out of a couple other things, too. The place was packed. The snow is an apocalypse scenario here in the South. Luckily, people seemed to be there mostly for water and canned food, so I was good to go. Except when a young lady approached me for help. I have no idea what could have possibly been in this woman's head. I don't recall what Kroger's uniform is, but I can say with certainty it's not jeans, a t-shirt, and a leather jacket, and resting bee-turd face to boot. I looked like I was gonna rob the place before I thought of working there. So this woman approaches me, looking late 20s with that sour look on her face, the one that says, "I want what I want, and reasoning isn't going to help me get it." Also, I'm mad. We all know it. Me is me, YL is the young lady. YL. Do you know where the firewood is? Me. Oh, I'm not sure Kroger sells firewood. I know they have some at Home Depot, though. Any lesser individual would have accepted this answer, but not our hero. YL. Excuse me? Me. YL. What do you mean you're not sure? Me. I mean, I'm not sure. YL. You work here, don't you? You should know where the firewood is, and at least if your store even carries it. I hit her with the F look. Bit of a frown, narrowed eyes, open mouth, like I want to say something. I know exactly what I look like. All I'm missing is some ink and piercings for the full, "There's no possible way I can work here" look. YL. What the hell is that look for? Me. I don't know how to respond to that. How do you look at me and think I work here? YL. Well, I see you here all the time. Just because you're off duty, like I'm a cop or something, doesn't mean you don't work here. Me. Has it occurred to you that we might just have a similar schedule? By now, she really wants her firewood, and so the best way to go about obtaining some was to slap me. There is no known mathematical model that could describe the whatever thoughts went through her head at that moment. She chose to slap a biker-looking dude a foot taller than her for the most menial reason ever. In my peripheral vision, some dude at the end of the aisle turned his head on a swivel with that, "oh crap, it's going down" look on his face. I think this lady assumed I was docile since I'd been pretty polite to her, and I have a very quiet voice. Unfortunately for all involved parties, my grandfather was a yeller and my mom has a temper. Me, now yelling, more like bellowing, at the top of my lungs, "Did you just effing slap me?" YL retreating in response to my advancing and also yelling, "You should have known!" Dude at the end of the aisle running over and also yelling, "Hey, hey, hey!" Managers were called, the police. Thank Christ they didn't feel like arresting me. Then both myself and that young lady were banned from that Kroger. But then I bought my food from Publix and played in the snow all day. So who really won? Probably the dude at the end of the aisle. My voice still hurts from raising it. Update, friendship regained with Kroger. Now Kroger and Publix both are my best friends. By that I mean I got my ban lifted, but Publix is going to keep my business. They have their own flaws, but so far I've never been personally wronged by Publix. And our last story. Can't park in my driveway? Okay. Many years ago, we lived in a cul-de-sac. Our neighbor was the president of the HOA and frankly disliked us. Whenever anyone parked in front of her house, she would demand they move their car because that was her parking spot. Well, one weekend we were having a birthday party for our kid. We had to double park cars in our driveway to accommodate the extra vehicles and avoid parking in front of her house. This meant two of the cars overlapped the sidewalk a little. We're in a cul-de-sac, kids play in the street all the time, so it didn't block anyone from walking past. Midway through the party, we have a couple of cops show up. Our neighbor called them to complain because her daughter couldn't ride her bike on the sidewalk due to our parking. She could have easily gone around the cars, and the cops agreed it was stupid, but technically it was illegal to park on the sidewalk, and we'd have to move the cars. I told them we had issues with the neighbor when we parked in front of her house, and they said street parking is public parking and free for anyone as long as the vehicle didn't remain there for an extended period of time. Okay, HOA lady. We moved the double parked cars to in front of her house, and from then on, we always parked at least one of our cars in front of her house, even if there was room in our driveway, and parked it in such a way to block any other cars from parking in front of her house. Ah, the sweet taste of compliance. Turning the tables on the HOA president by utilizing legal street parking is a masterstroke. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.